Hey everybody, I'm John Reardon, and by now you've likely picked up on the fact that Rockstar's new Grand Theft Auto Trilogy Definitive Edition might not be quite as definitive as we'd hoped. Long story short, a mix of legacy and brand new issues come into play to create something full of brand new issues. On top of that, the new art style attempts to bring the PS2 era graphics into the modern era, but lacks any consistent art direction. Characters in the same scene often look like they belong in entirely different games, and the environments generally look more like someone trying to poorly recreate N64 games in Unreal Engine than like a professional effort. I've made the argument in the past across a few different videos that I consider it extremely important that a remaster or remake be highly aware of the artistic intentions of the original game and endeavor to preserve them. But of course, all of that is already being said by just about everyone on the internet right now. What I want to look at in particular is the Switch version. Firstly, because this is the first time that any of these three games have been officially released on a Nintendo platform. And secondly, because if a game has issues on more powerful hardware, one always has to wonder what's going to happen with the Switch version. So let's start with the raw numbers. When docked, the Switch runs these games at a resolution of 576 by 1088. Honestly, a pretty low number, keeping in mind that the original PS2 version of San Andreas in particular ran at a vertical resolution of 448 versus the Switch's 576. Now, it is possible that a dynamic resolution is in play, and rendering resolution may jump a little above or below this, but every scene I've counted came out at this same resolution. But that being said, finding shots to count is a little difficult, as the image is treated with a temporal anti-aliasing solution. This means that each frame uses information from the previous frames to help artificially smooth out the image. So we're really only able to get a firm resolution count on frames that occurred just after a hard cut, before this effect has had time to kick in. Meanwhile, handheld mode seems to run at a similar number, though I will say the image holds up much better on a smaller screen. As for frame rate, GTA on Switch targets the same 30 frames per second as the other versions. While things like cutscenes and on-foot exploration generally play out alright, getting in a car can easily drag the frame rate down into the low 20s. This is especially true for San Andreas, which features an impressively large map. But it really struggles as you drive around town. And in case you hadn't picked up on it, yes, a game called Grand Theft Auto involves a fair amount of driving around town. It likely doesn't help that the PS2's draw distance assisting fog has been entirely removed from these versions of the game, meaning you can see clear across the map at any time. I don't know what's going on, but first it was Ocarina of Time and now it's this. It's like we all just suddenly forgot how to properly implement distance fog in games. And on the topic of performance, it's also worth noting that loading times, specifically in San Andreas, are often very long. I didn't have nearly as much trouble with these in Grand Theft Auto 3 and Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Beyond the numbers, there are plenty of other technical changes made specifically to the Switch version of the trilogy. Ambient Occlusion, which provides shade behind objects and in tight spaces, seems to be either entirely absent or at least very, very pulled back. The insides of buildings visible through windows have been removed. It's likely these were parallax maps rather than traditional geometry, as material simplification in general seems to be a trend that can also be spotted on select cube maps being absent, meaning some objects that should have reflections are occasionally reflectionless. On the bright side, screen space reflections are still used on things like windows and the roofs of cars. Texture work, which is already fairly low resolution, is somehow even lower on the Switch version. Essentially, all fine details on characters are just lost, and everyone looks especially plasticky as a result. I wasn't expecting to be reminded of the Army Men series when I started playing these games, but here we are. Environmental details like foliage, specifically grass, has been greatly pulled back to the point of it largely being absent in many areas. I was also unable to spot any of the volumetric clouds seen in other versions of the game, and to my eye, clouds instead look pretty 2D. The range at which dynamic shadows are rendered is also pulled back very close to the player, and things like car headlights don't cast shadows as they do in other versions. There honestly isn't a lot of good news on this one. This is a pretty rough version of a very rough remaster. Resolution is remarkably close to that of the original games on PS2. Similarly, the frame rate feels a lot like how I remember those early open-world games running on original hardware. I find it difficult to even make the argument that it looks significantly better than the original, as the art direction is such a monumental mess. Honestly, if someone were to ask me if they should play the Grand Theft Auto trilogy on Switch, I'd sooner recommend LA Noire or Lego City Undercover as alternatives. To be blunt, I just don't feel this is an acceptable state to release these games in. It would be one thing if they were just visual issues, but the performance, both in terms of image quality and frame rate, are both extremely rough. I could also give it a pass if this were some high-end modern game, but these are lightly remastered PS2 games. The developer has promised patches, but the Switch version in particular has a long way to go. But that's all I've got for now. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and, ring the bell so you actually see our videos when they come out. You can chat with us about this or anything else Nintendo related in our Discord using the link in the description. If you have any questions about these games, you can leave a comment below or just ask me directly on Twitter using the username on screen. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm John Raridan, and I will see you next time. This video is made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.